Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's the last day that I'm in Blighty, and then I get to go home. And I must be honest and say, -2 really doesn't work for me. I don't know how it works for anybody. It's bloody cold here. In any case, let's get on to the main video of today. And actually, as I'm in Britain, before I get onto the Trump news around South Africa and the G20, let's actually talk a little bit around what's going on in Britain. Because many individuals in Britain, regardless of who I speak to, are noticing the demographic, cultural, and political landscape in Britain is undergoing a rapid transformation. And I mean, everybody I talk to is talking about this. Now, we got to give you an example so that you kind of get an idea as to what we're referring to. And let's use the example that the white British population in London has decreased by 600,000 individuals, whilst the minority population has increased by 1.2 million individuals. And many of the individuals from minority backgrounds, now majority backgrounds, are celebrating this as a win.
NHS exists to provide the best possible care to patients. Now, some of those patients will feel more comfortable speaking in their native language.
I don't care.
Right?
I have no interest in that.
Well, fine.
They should speak English. They live in England, they should speak English.
The white British population has decreased by 600,000, while the minority population has increased by 1.2 million. So, yes, lads, we're winning.
Now, before we go on further with the video of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you want to support me, just share the video with your friends. Share the video with your friends, help the video go viral. That's all I ask. There are now 72 schools in England, 72, where there are 0 white British children. And there are 454 schools where white British pupils are less than 2%. Now, white British children are now a minority in 1/4 of UK schools. Yet, any concerns about this tend to be dismissed as not ethnic cleansing. It's just like a coincidence. Now, many individuals are noticing that the population replacement, which is, I'm guaranteed, I've been told, it's just a conspiracy theory, even though when you listen to the numbers, that's not really what you see. But many of the individuals are coming from, should we call them, not Christian countries. And this is having startling impacts on the local population's enjoyment of their national homeland. What we are seeing now is where Christian spaces like Christmas markets are shifting. And what do I mean by that? Well, have a look at this.
Muhammad is the last companion. Allah alone. Muhammad is the last companion.
It's the last and final.
Allah alone. I testify. Allah. I testify.
Now, what you would have actually seen is that there is now an Islamic conversion booth that has been placed between Santa's Grotto and mulled wine stalls, because that's okay now, apparently. So what was once celebrated as a celebration of British Christian heritage is now increasingly being watered down underneath the banner of diversity. But it is not being watered down. What's actually happening is you're finding that the new incoming population is being increasingly hostile to the native population. And this is important because a former Lebanon refugee this week actually bemoaned the fact that Lebanon was once a majority Christian nation and is now an Islamic-dominated nation, exports terrorism. And she says the actual transformation that occurred to transform Lebanon from a Christian majority country to what is now a terrorist exporting Islamic dominated state has the same parallels in many cities across the West. And when you're in the West and you're in places like Europe or Britain, you see it firsthand. Now, there are politicians such as Rupert Lowe who are openly saying that Britain must remain a Christian nation rooted in its historical values. He says, without confidence in these traditions, it will slip through our fingers. But the thing is simple. Britain abandons its foundation, and the new ideological structure replaces it. It's not just Britain. The same thing is now occurring in Italy, where this week a Christmas tree lighting was interrupted by doctors and scholars. In fact, you can watch that yourself right here.
I don't know what they are doing. وريهم. خير إن شاء الله. خليها تكميل ثم أروح إن شاء الله. I will go إن شاء الله recite some Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. جزاكم الله خير. إخوة مسلمون.
أنا مسلم الحمد لله.
الحمد لله نحن في روم برودرز في ميلان نقرأ قرآن we recite القرآن الحمد لله.
Now, we have to remind ourselves that we've seen this elsewhere. This isn't isolated to England, Italy, Lebanon. Let's use the example of Bethlehem, because obviously it's now coming up to Christmas, and we're talking about all these Christmas events. Well, where was Christ born? Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem was 80% Christian when it was under Israeli control. But after it was handed to the Palestinian Authority in 1995, the Christian population is now less than 10%. So there's another real-life example of culture erasure. The same thing's happening in the West. Now, in Britain, we have an enabler of that. His name is Keir Starmer. You may have heard about him. And one of the things that he has been criticized for the longest time is what has been called the Islamophobia rule or law, where he was basically putting blasphemy rules in place that prohibited you or locked you up from making fun of Islam. Well, he canned that after a lot of public opposition, but he is now pushing forward again with the same law. But he's rebranded it as no longer the Islamophobia bill. It's now the anti-Muslim hatred bill. Yes, you can't make this stuff up. But it's essentially the same blasphemy rule. And critics are saying that all it's doing is expanding state protection for one ideology. It criminalizes criticism of Islam or Islamic extremism. So you're not even allowed to notice everything I've just noticed to you. Under this rule, this video would get me locked up. Now, it gives preferential treatment to mosques through public funding. No one else gets the same millions upon millions of funding that they do. It doesn't offer this type of protection to churches, synagogues, or even the general public. Now, many Labour MPs admit that the definition now being shown is only being agreed by left-wing activists. The public, they're not even being asked about this. Like, they don't care about the public. They care about the left-wing activists. Now, you can see this. You can see how this is going, because we have numerous examples where new reports out in the United Kingdom are showing that things such as the grooming gang rapes have been more associated with Islam than ethnicity. Muslim perpetrators statistically overrepresented beyond a shadow of a doubt, include Pakistani demographics. The Pakistani demographics wasn't the main characteristic. It was Muslim demographics. But none of the mainstream media are covering this. It's a well-known fact. Everybody knows it. It's in the official reports. But the mere fact of me noticing it now, remember, underneath the new law, me even saying this could get me locked up. Now, you may think that that's all, it's a bit much. But when we talk about the establishment almost outlawing or criminalizing the native population's religion, we actually have an example of that. We have it in Northern Ireland because new guidance out, because of a court case, declares that Christian-focused religious education is now unlawful. And schools have been ordered, underneath new guidelines, to prioritize Islam in RE, that's religious education, lessons. Now you have to ask yourself a question. You're outlawed from teaching Christian-focused education. You're told you have to teach Islam. Yeah, that's a dramatic shift for a country that's supposedly a Christian country. Now, many individuals are noticing that this appears like the UK is nothing more than a failed state incapable of defending its own cultures. And many MPs are very worried about the new Islamophobia rules that protect religious beliefs from scrutiny from one religion only. It's bizarre. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is England, the number one destination that South Africans want to move to. They really need their head checked. Now, moving on to South African-focused news, and let's keep it in line with Ireland, as we mentioned Ireland, because they've just banned Christian education. Well, you will note that Ireland sided with South Africa when it came through to taking Israel to the ICJ. Well, Ireland has now said that they stand as a strategic Western ally of South Africa. Ireland frames its relationship with South Africa as historically rooted in solidarity during the anti-apartheid struggle, emphasizing shared values of democracy, human rights, and social justice. Now, if you know, you know, but Ireland recently got a really radical new president. Yeah, like really radical. Well, they've expressly praised South Africa's G20 leadership. I mean, very few. And they mention these themes of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, or communist-type ideas. And they've all argued that these strongly align with Ireland's worldview. So Ireland sees economic synergy with South Africa. They've mentioned that in 2023, they traded 5.8 billion euros with South Africa. And they say that there are 12,500 South African jobs all linked to Irish firms. A lot of them to do with Irish whiskey, it's apparently high-tech services, agri-tech, fintech, and digital services. So Ireland apparently sees South Africa's G20 presidency as a way to promote multilateralism and global fractures, because they're all for this type of communist global fracturing. But what we're actually seeing is that Ireland is stepping into a visible pro-South Africa role as the US pulls away. And a lot of that can be traced to the original fellowship that Ireland had with South Africa over the ICJ case. You see why that ICJ case was so important to talk about? Yeah, Israel shill. And it's like, actually, I did keep telling you, it's important to understand how critical that case and Israel it is to the forms of global solidarity between South Africa and its allies. So yes, Ireland with its new radical leftist thinker has just outlawed Christian teaching, thinks South Africa is a great friend because they all agree on solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Ireland, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, let's talk about the US boycott. As they said, the US is pulling away. So what's actually gone on? Well, you got to be honest and say, this G20 stuff with Donald Trump is starting to become like almost farcical. Because as you know, the US initially boycotted the Johannesburg G20 following Trump's criticism of South Africa. Now, you will know in the last days or so, that's actually escalated, where he says that South Africa is engaged in extermination and human rights abuses, specifically referring to Afrikaners, and now the Palestinian arrivals. And if you watched my video from yesterday, you'll notice that Donald Trump actually raised questions around the new Palestinians. Now, Ramaphosa confirms that South Africa made an 11th hour request to attend. Now, if you remember, Donald Trump said he was sending no one. In fact, he actually prohibited from anybody going. Well, apparently now they want to attend in one shape or another. Now, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but it's a reversal nonetheless. Now, the US Embassy wrote a letter on the 20th of November requesting accreditation for an 8-member delegation. They requested security, motorcades, parking, and bypassing certain security zones. Now, this is all going to be led by individuals who aren't really at senior level in the US. It's kind of like a half presence, but they're still going to be there. Now, I suppose you could say that's because of Ramaphosa's suggestion that he's just going to hand over the G20 to an empty chair and try and embarrass the US. And potentially the US is backtracking so that they don't kind of lose face. Now, Trump says that South Africa has behaved extremely badly. The G20 shouldn't be held in South Africa. Afrikaners are being killed and slaughtered in South Africa. Ramaphosa responded to that saying, boycott politics don't work. The US has the right to present as an original G20 member. They probably should present, but if they don't, we're going to embarrass them. And now the US is like, yeah, maybe we should go. So yeah, South Africa is going to treat this as a win, saying the US caved. Did they cave? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, in the last couple of days, the US actually mocked South Africa's G20, and they called it the G100 because South Africa has just been inviting, well, everybody. Now, Ramaphosa did actually counter that today, and he says, well, we're not convening the G100. We've convened the G1,000,000. Yeah, that's a huge zinger, apparently. And he says that South Africa wants to maximize inclusion. He wants all of Africa, the global south, and civil society. He says he just wanted to invite everybody. I suppose this is the way of trying to give legitimacy to the G20s when the US was trying to isolate it and make it look like a dead deal. Now, the reason that Ramaphosa wants the G20 to be so important and so successful is you need to understand what the priorities are. And the first one is to lower the debt burdens for Africa. Now, for those of you who don't know, Africa loves to take loans from Western countries, world banks and so forth, and they never pay them back. The money gets stolen, they never actually get anything for it, and then they don't know how to pay it back because inevitably they impoverish the citizens that live there, taxes plummet, and they're just going to money. So now they want the world to just go, it's fine, just write the debt off. Now, they said that doing that and not calling into question all of the weird stuff that goes on in African states, and there are numerous examples of it, well, that in itself is respect for African sovereignty. And so that's what Ramaphosa wants. He wants respect for African sovereignty, and he says that he wants the rules-based world order to no longer be dominated by Western hypocrisy. But you see, the rules-based world order is currently being run by like nut jobs. Many of them very extremist nut jobs that come from very dictatorial countries with zero democracy and zero accountability. And the rules as they're trying to align them are, how do I scam my nation without being caught? Now, Ramaphosa hints that Western countries violate the very values they preach, which to a degree is kind of true, they do. And that's because many of these Western nations will currently have cultural identity issues. But you and I both know that this is just a jab at US criticism. He's effectively saying my agenda is to somehow counter the US. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of US-South Africa tension over this entire summit. But one of the really weird things is that despite all of this, business leaders in the US just went to the summit anyway. They kind of like ignored Donald Trump and just went. US corporate leadership just went to the G20. And apparently the US Chambers of Commerce and the leader of it said that South Africa's business community, he described them as being ambitious, sophisticated, and incredibly knowledgeable. I suppose that's the ones that aren't entrepreneurs and actually, I don't know, produce something. He says that the global north and the global south divide is now irrelevant. Well, it kind of is irrelevant because many people just trade online. And so you don't actually have to be divided anymore because everybody's united by the internet. And he said that all of us share economic aims, which is true. Most people don't want to live in a fractured society. They just want to have a stable job with a family that they can raise and enough money to go on 2 holidays a year and eat some food. That's pretty much what everybody wants. It doesn't matter who you talk to in South Africa. White, black, Indian, colored, Muslim, Christian, don't matter. Hindu, we all want the same thing. So there is a degree of truth in that. And he said that US businessmen are sending large delegations to the B20. They say they don't support Trump's anti-South Africa stance. They said they want stronger South Africa-US commercial ties, regardless of the politics. Now, South African business leaders highlight Africa's importance, specifically in terms of minerals, youth population, and climate positioning. And many of them note that there is now a split between the US government's hostility and US private sector engagement. Now, that in itself is important because it's important to understand that South Africa has been lobbying in the US with the business community. They are not lobbying with Trump or the political establishment. And it's interesting to see the fruit of that in terms of the US Chamber of Commerce and how they've basically just said, screw it, just go do business there. And I suppose to a degree, that's what business should do. Businesses should be independent of politics. But still, let me know what you think of that. Now, one of the countries that actually found South Africa's minerals to be very important is the EU. And let us not forget that this is the EU led by an unelected communist dictator. And if you know who she is, you know. But South Africa and the EU have now signed a critical minerals MOU, that's a memorandum of understanding, and this is going to strengthen Europe's access to key metals needed for renewable energy and battery tech from South Africa. Now, the EU wants to diversify away from China and compete with the US, which is aggressively buying global mineral stockpiles from under their noses, they say. Now, the EU delegation visited South Africa's manganese factory, and that manganese factory is the only producer of high-grade electrolytic manganese outside of China. Now, what that will mean for our relationship with China when we actually directly compete against it, well, that's going to be interesting. But Brussels sees South Africa as a cornerstone for new EU mineral supply. And apparently this deal was timed 2 days before the G20, showing that they were deliberately trying to do some forms of political signaling, showing that the EU supports South Africa's G20 presidency, whilst rejecting the US narrative, which portrays South Africa as problematic, and American boycotts of the G20, whilst also going directly after the very minerals that they say they need to compete against America. So very interesting to see how the global positions are now shifting, possibly away from the US, possibly towards the global South. And it's very interesting to note who's doing that, because the very individuals who are doing that and siding with them, Ireland, the EU, are all being led by far left activists. Okay, so that's the news of today. Let me know what you think of everything in the comments section below. And until next time, hopefully I'm actually in warmer climates by the time I do my next video. But in any case, bye.